Yá'át'ééh. Good morning, my relatives. Have you ever had an extra piece of pie for dessert, or larger scoop of ice cream than you knew you should have or wanted, or an extra portion at dinner or at lunch, and you thought, I'll exercise later and work this off? Well, I just read a book called Move Your DNA by Katy Bowman, and it was a paradigm shifting book for me. And what she points out in this book is that one of the things we've done, because we live in a largely sedentary world and lifestyle today, and many of us have an abundance of food. Years ago, generations ago, thousands of years ago, when most people were hunters and gatherers, we would go out and hunt, we would move, and we would get our food, gather our food, farm our food, bring it home, and the reward for our movement would be a good meal. But today, because we have an abundance of food, we eat more than we should, and then exercise becomes our punishment. We've created a negative paradigm out of movement versus food when we have a sedentary lifestyle and we have an abundance of food and we punish ourselves for eating too much by going to exercise. That's what I want to talk about with you today. The paradigm shift of movement to exercise, what that's done to us, and what we need to do to begin changing back from that. My name is Mark Charles. I am a dual citizen of the United States and the Navajo Nation. I am the son of an American woman of Dutch heritage and a Navajo man. I ran for president in 2020 with a vision to build a nation where we the people actually means all the people. And every few days, a couple times a week, I sit down with my second cup of coffee and talk about the world we live in, try to shift our paradigm a little bit and take the conversation a little bit deeper. One of the things I'm working very hard to do is to create common memory so that we might, for the very first time, have a much healthier community. I invite you to join my relatives. I am doing what my Navajo people would say, walk in beauty. And I want to invite you to learn with me how to walk in beauty together. So let's get going. Well, let me start the way I always begin my second cup of coffee, which is by acknowledging the land that I'm on. I moved to Washington, D.C. about 10 years ago with my family. We moved here from the Navajo Nation. This area in the Northeast around Washington, D.C. is the traditional land of the Piscataway. I want to honor the Piscataway as the hosts of the lands where I live. I want to thank them for their stewardships of these lands and just state how humble I am to be walking, living, breathing, and moving on these lands today. If you have been following me, you'll know this is my second cup of coffee this week. I was traveling earlier this week, and I was out of town for a few days. Let me see who's on with me. Oscar, Yá'át'ééh, thanks for joining me. It's good to have you here. And so I was back in the Navajo Nation. I was back between our four sacred mountains last weekend, and I was invited to speak at the Navajo Nation Museum. They had a day honoring and remembering the treaty that we signed with the U.S. government back in 1868 on June 1st, and they were having a long walk speaker series. I spoke in the speaker series last year, and they invited me back to do it again this year, and it was an honor to be there. I love having an opportunity to talk about these things, the doctrine of discovery, exposing Abraham Lincoln, who was the architect of the long walk for our Navajo people, and laying out these unsettling truths for my Navajo people so that we can really understand the history better. And for those of you who weren't able to join us live, that event was actually live streamed. They had three speakers, one beginning at 11, one at noon, and I spoke at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And they had a 3.5, 4 hour live stream that was just ran through all three speakers. And I'm going to share that with you now here in the chat. And if you'd like to watch that, it's on Facebook at the Navajo Nation Museum Facebook page, and I speak about 2 hours, 17 minutes, and 29 seconds into the live stream. So if you want to go to that, if you want to watch the other speakers, they're actually really good. The second one especially, I forget her name, but she was a professor from UNM and had done some research on the long walk and had some really good content to share. But I speak around 2 hours, 17 minutes, and 29 seconds. And then I go until the end of it's about a 4 hour live stream. But so I welcome you to watch that. And had a really good trip. If you follow me on social media, you'll see I posted a few pictures. Of course, every time I'm back in the Southwest, I love to post pictures of the sunrises that I watch, and it's just gorgeous coming up over the Red Rocks, between our four sacred mountains. And I've been going back every few months. I usually go back every 2 or 3 months to see my parents. Both my parents, as you may know, are in their 80s, and so I try to get back to spend some time with them and just help make sure things are going well at their house and help them out in ways that I can. And but this time when I went back, my parents were actually in California because my niece was graduating. And so I flew into Albuquerque on Friday, and they had left Gallup Thursday night on the train. They took the Amtrak to Southern California, and then but they said I could stay at their house. I could use their car, so I actually jumped on the Amtrak Friday afternoon and took that into Gallup, and then I stayed at their house and used their car over the weekend. Um, and then I stayed a few extra days and hung out around the res, saw some people. And then I was scheduled to go home. I had a flight Tuesday afternoon, and my parents were coming on the Amtrak Tuesday morning. And so I was scheduled to take the Amtrak back that morning to Gallup. And so I drove their car, took it to the train station, parked it in the handicap parking zone, and I got off, went to wait for the train. My parents got off the train. I saw them, gave them a hug, handed them the keys, and then I jumped on the train. And so we had a very brief reunion in front of the train in Gallup, New Mexico, as they got off coming from California, and I jumped on going further east into Albuquerque. And it was just a brief moment, but it was really fun to see my parents that way. My father, of course, just had hip surgery about a month and a half ago and is recovering well from that. But it was really good to see them, even if only for a few moments. So that was kind of a fun way to see them as we were kind of transitioning, and they were coming and I was leaving, and so on and so forth. But yeah, so anyway, so that was good, and now I'm home for most of the rest of the month. I don't have any travel. My next trip is the first week of July. I'm going to be flying to North Dakota, and I will be speaking at the second of a Lewis and Clark speaking series, and that will be on July 2nd. I don't have all those details right in front of me. There are a few on my social media, but I will obviously be sharing more about those these next few weeks as we get closer to that event on July 2nd. But today, let me see who else has jumped on. I see George, Yá'át'ééh, thanks for joining this morning. Steve, Yá'át'ééh, thanks for joining this morning. It's good to have people here. Grab your favorite morning beverage, pull up a chair, and I want to talk this morning about the difference between movement and exercise. So I've been reading a bunch of books. If you follow me on social media and my Second Cups of Coffee, you'll know that it was about a year ago I had hip surgery, and I had my left hip replaced. And one of my goals after that surgery was to get back into shape to be able to play basketball. I knew it was going to take a long time to do that, but after my surgery, I began walking very regularly. I began extending the distances that I walk. And one of the things I was really intent about doing, because I know myself, and I know that if I make my exercise dependent upon going to a gym, it will be too easy to skip doing exercise, and it will be too easy to say, well, I don't want to go to the gym today, or I don't want to do this today, and so then I end up not exercising. And so my goal all along was not to just add exercise into my daily routine, but to change my daily habit so that I exercised or moved more. That was my goal all along. And so I began, and years ago when we had a dog, I used to walk my dog every day, and we live in a place where there's a lot of stores and shops around us, so I began walking more regularly to the coffee shops and to the grocery stores nearby. But the big change came earlier this year in early 2024 when I rented a co-working office space about a mile from my house. And I could drive there, but finding parking, it would take just as long for me to drive there, look for parking, and then walk from wherever I parked into the office. And so it's so much easier just to walk to my office. And so most days I walk there twice. I walk there once in the morning, do some work there in the morning, and then walk back for lunch, and then walk back in the afternoon, do some more work in the afternoon, and then walk home after that. And when I started doing that, my daily walking went from about 3 to 5 miles a day to about 5 to 7 or even 6 to 8 miles a day. And just by walking to my office and back every day, I was walking 4 miles right there. And then any other movement and any other errands I ran or anything else I did throughout the day just added to my daily total. And so my daily mileage went up really, really high after I rented my office and I began walking there. And I began doing something else, which is during COVID, like most people, we started ordering our groceries and picking them up at the grocery store. We don't have them delivered, but I'll often place one order at the grocery store each week. And we'll get all of the kind of the staples for the week, the canned goods, the large items and stuff like that. And then I would usually run to a grocery store a few times a week to pick up a few odds and ends that we needed. But because there's a grocery store right across the street from my office, I actually decided to treat that grocery store, and they have a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables there. I decided to treat it like a farmer's market. And so again, I would order once a week, usually on the weekends, our major grocery order from a nearby grocery store that we would pick up and then bring home on the weekend. And then what I began doing was after I was at my office every day, I would walk to the grocery store, pick up the fruits and vegetables or whatever dairy we needed for that day or for the next morning, bring those home and then cook them. And I found that added a little bit more extra walking into my day, but it also it allowed me. I actually really enjoyed it. I enjoyed being able to go out that day, pick up a few fruits, a few vegetables, a couple of bananas, some squash, or some peppers, or whatever else. Bring them home and then cook that for our dinner, or have that for our breakfast the next morning. And then do the same thing again the next day. I found because it was mostly fruits and vegetables, which you don't usually buy in bulk anyway, it wasn't a whole lot more expensive to buy them that way. And what I began to realize is I actually really liked the idea, the mentality it gave me of bringing my food home every day that I was cooking for the meal that night. And so I was beginning to do that. And then it was last February. I was trying to find a way to increase my productivity and be more focused. And I read a book. You heard me talk about it. It's a book I don't really recommend, but it had a few nuggets in it that were pretty good. And that book was titled The 5 a.m. Club. And one of the things this book recommended was getting out and sweating every morning for 20 minutes, breaking a sweat. And I was at the point where I was already walking 5 to 6, 7 miles a day. And so I thought, I'm about at the point where I want to start getting more vigorous in my movement. And so I decided I'm going to start breaking a sweat. And it blew me away how much better I felt every day by just getting out and breaking a sweat early in the morning. I wasn't getting up at 5 a.m. I've actually been working on my sleep a lot this last year too, but I was getting up around 6:30 and then going out for a run and breaking a sweat or getting on the elliptical. And I was amazed at how well I was feeling and how good I was feeling. And around that same time, I read another book called Born to Run, which is kind of the big book on barefoot running. It's kind of the book that started the trend maybe a decade ago about the tribe down in South America and Mexico who does barefoot running. And the book really gives a very good vision for barefoot running. It doesn't give the how-to or a lot of the technical information, but it does give the vision for it. And often it oversells the vision, and so people kind of jump into it a bit too vigorously. But I decided to try going into barefoot running. And as could be expected, my body wasn't quite ready for it. My Achilles tendons were still pretty tight. My calf muscles were still tight. They hadn't been stretched out, which is required because of the way we walk in our heeled shoes. And so I started buying a lot of books about how to transition well from wearing heeled supportive shoes to barefoot shoes and barefoot running. And I went through several books. I read this book called Older Yet Faster. I read this book called Whole Body Barefoot by Katy Bowman. And then that led me to this book called Move Your DNA. And Move Your DNA is the book I want to talk about today. The other two books were much more technical, and they were very good books. They gave a lot of really good information about how to transition from wearing heeled supportive shoes into, and by heeled shoes, I mean basically every pair of shoes we have today has a raised heel. Even if it's only half an inch, it still raises our heel up above our toes, which puts us at a slanting position, gives the sensation of we're walking downhill, requires us to actually, because we wear them every day, all day, it actually, our Achilles tendons and our calf muscles adapt by shrinking, by tightening and getting shorter. And so anyway, the other two books were really good about how to kind of transition from heeled supportive shoes to barefoot shoes, and very good books. But the third book was a paradigm shift for me. It was still fairly technical, gave a lot of good how-tos and exercises and things. But one of the things, the author, Katy Bowman, who is a biomechanist, she studies biomechanics, or she studied biomechanics. She works as a biomechanics person, or a biomechanist, I think is what it's called. And she presented a paradigm in that book that kind of, I mean, she started in the other, because she wrote the other book too that I read about the transition, the whole body barefoot. And there was a few things in there that really caught my eye, but then she goes very in depth into this book called Move Your DNA. And one of the things that she talks about frequently is the difference between movement versus exercise. And to help you understand that, one of the things she says in the book, and she goes back and throughout kind of human history, even back to kind of evolutionary history, and the way the human body evolved, or the way the human body was designed, depending on your belief system. We all at one point, even European people, subsisted as hunters and gatherers. And when we subsisted, and many indigenous people still subsist more in that tradition today than not, but we're also losing that too. But when you subsist, or when you live as a hunter-gatherer, your entire day is filled with movement. You're walking, you're hunting, you're gathering, you're skinning the animals, you're picking the plants, you're farming the land, right? You're in a space of, you're constantly moving throughout the day. And over the course of human history, especially Western civilization, as we've developed more technologies that have moved us further away from a subsistence level of living, and it has specialized us more, where we're not just hunters and gatherers, but we're working in more sedentary careers and jobs, sitting at desks and so on and so forth, much more specialized. Our lives have gotten really sedentary. We don't move much. We sit in chairs like I'm doing right now for sometimes 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 hours a day, right? And we're able to feed our families because of the work we do in our chairs. And this goes back all the way to first grade, right? It's kindergarten, when you're taught to sit still, to be in a chair, and to learn. And so our lives become sedentary. And then to be healthy, we go out and exercise. And frequently, she says in her book, we'll go out and we'll go to a gym and we'll do repetitive motions over and over again, whether it's lifting weights, or whether it's running on a treadmill, or whether it's playing a certain sport and hitting a ball, or bouncing a ball, or swinging a bat, or swinging a club, or whatever else, right? We'll go out and we'll do more of these repetitive motions, and we'll usually find a favorite exercise and a favorite movement we like to do, and we'll do those a lot. We'll try to strengthen certain parts of our muscles and parts of our body. But so what she points out in this book is we've replaced a lifestyle that had a broad range of movement, moving your arms, moving your legs, using your muscles, not strengthening them beyond capacity, but using them for the intended purposes that they exist. And we've replaced that now with, by and large, sitting in a chair or being sedentary or doing repetitive motions over and over and over again for the bulk of our day. And then going out and exercising to get our cardiovascular or to strengthen ourselves in certain ways. And I won't go into the whole book, but she points out how this is actually not healthy, and you can't just replace a lifestyle where your day is filled with 14 hours of a wide range of movements to maybe a half an hour to an hour of exercise a few times a week. Right? That's not going to do it. And so she talks about how because we do repetitive motions, because we sit so much, because we stand on heeled shoes with supportive feet, we actually are restricting our mobility. And as we get older, when we're young and we're strong, our bodies can kind of overcome that restrictive mobility by overusing some muscles and not using other muscles. But as we get older, we begin to lose mobility. And she gives one example, she gives several, but one example she gives that really was striking to me was she talked about our posture, right? And she said, we often associate with old age kind of a hunched back, you're leaning forward a little bit, and your shoulders are moved forward. And she said, oftentimes a parent, when they see their child in that posture, that position, they will tell them to sit up straighter, to tuck in their chin, and to straighten their shoulders, right? And we have to have good posture. But what she says that doesn't solve the problem. She said when we do that, because our back is already bent forward and our shoulders are hunched forward, when we sit up straighter, we're merely adding a second curve into our spine. And it's not fixing it looks better, but we're not fixing the problem. She said the reason we have a hunched back, the reason we have hunched shoulders is because from the age of 5, we've been training 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 hours a day to sit at a desk, to sit at a computer, to sit behind the steering wheel of a car and have our arms out in front of us like this. And that is what causes our shoulders to move forward and our backs to become hunched and our shoulders to lean forward and so on and so forth. And so she said, if we want to fix that problem, we have to change our position of what we spend the bulk of our days in. And we have to use other muscles. Instead of just having our hands in front of us, we have to use them to pull us towards items and to push us away from things more. Again, the full range of movement. Again, all of this was kind of paradigm shifting for me. And this was about a week and a half ago, and it was just before I went on my trip. And I decided I actually stopped working for like 4 days. And I read like 3 of these books in about 4 or 5 days, and I just let my brain kind of ponder them. I let the shift in paradigm these books were giving to me kind of take hold. And I really allowed myself to go deep into thinking, what does this mean? What would it mean to change these things? And I realized I'd already begun some of those changes already, right? I already, instead of going to exercise every day, I was incorporating more walking into my life. Instead of driving to the grocery store and having that reverse relationship with food where exercise becomes a punishment for eating too much, I was already in the habit of buying my food daily and walking home with it, walking to the store, walking back, and making a more positive relationship with my food and my movement, where food was now a reward. Healthy food was a reward for movement I was doing throughout my day. And I realized I was already making some of those adjustments. But I'm an author. I'm a writer. I sit at this desk or at the desk of my office easy for 4, 6, 8 hours a day. When I travel, I sit on planes. When I'm in hotel rooms, right? I very much am still in this place of these repetitive motions. And one of the points Katy makes throughout her book is that it's not bad that we sit. It's bad that we sit for 10 hours a day. And then we try to fix that problem by buying a standing desk. And then instead of sitting for 10 hours a day, we stand for 10 hours a day. She said our problem we have in this modern world is we do things repetitively over and over and over and over again. And we think that 30 minutes of exercise 3 times a week is going to somehow fix that. And so again, this is a massive paradigm shift. And already, right, I'm already walking 6 to 8 hours, 6 to 8 miles a day, which is not something you do fast. That's almost at least, if you figure about 15 to 20 miles or 20 minutes a mile to walk. I mean, I'm already walking about an hour and a half to 2 hours a day, just walking. And I'm running now at least 20 minutes in the morning. So again, there's 2.5 hours every day of my life where I'm out exercising and moving. But again, I'm still sitting here. And so I began thinking about what can I do? What do I need? What other changes do I need to make so that I'm not so sedentary? So I move more, and I actually, and the 3 movements that Katy is really big on in her book is hanging from like a bar, like you're doing the monkey bars or something, hanging from your hands, squatting. And not squatting like an exercise with weights on, but squatting, she said, most of the world today, squatting for them is a resting position. Or even it's a way that they do bodily functions, such as use the bathroom. People will squat in a lot of parts of the world today. And many Americans, myself included, because of the repetitive motions and the sitting and the heeled shoes we're wearing and all these things, have by and large lost the ability to squat. And squatting is definitely not a resting position for us, right? For many of us, it's a strain to get down and get back up. And so anyway, so I'm thinking, how can I begin to incorporate more of these movements into my day and into my lifestyle, and what can I do about sitting at a desk without just moving to a standing desk? And she's big on hanging, she's big on squats, she's big on walking off the road, and she's big on sitting on the floor. All of these things which require you to move at greater intervals and more frequently, and to stretch your muscles in your body in different ways. And one of the other points she makes about walking is she says not only are we sitting still most of the day and we're walking in our heeled shoes with elevated heels and support for our arches and everything else, which is almost like holding your hand in a cast. And you know what happens to your strength and your muscles in your arm when you have it in a cast for several weeks, right? It atrophies your muscles. But she said when we do walk, a majority of our walking throughout the day, 95% of our walking probably, is on flat surfaces at horizontal levels, right? We're walking on sidewalks, we're walking on roads, we're walking on trodden paths, and we're walking by and large flat. Occasionally we'll have a gradual hill we'll walk up, but we're not climbing, right? We're not walking over roots or rocks or wading through ponds or walking in grass with uneven ground and even holes in the ground. We're not doing that. And so she's really big on getting off the path and walking in those environments. And so I've tried to incorporate some of that into my life, right? I'm out, and I actually feel like I'm a kid sometimes, because I'm out, and when I walk, and I'll actually show you a few pictures, I'm out and I'm looking for places where I can actually move more. And so I find paths where there's rocks along the sidewalk, and I'll walk on these rocks, forcing my ankles and my feet and my toes to move and to grip and to just have more space. I'll look for roots on the side of the sidewalk that I can walk on next to trees and kind of, again, move my ankle a little bit more. And I sometimes feel like I'm a kid out walking today. because I'm looking for ways I can move more. And I'm looking now for paths. How can I get off the sidewalk and not only walk for 6-8 miles a day, but walk in a way that actually works out my ankles and my calf muscles and my stretches my tendons more the way they're supposed to be. But again, this still doesn't fix the problem of I'm an author. And a lot of my work requires me sitting at a desk writing on my computer. And so one of the things I decided to do is I decided to learn how to dictate. And I actually began doing some research into writing books through dictation. And there's actually a fairly large subculture of authors who are dictating their books. And there's a lot of blog posts, a lot of books being written, a lot of things being said about how this is advantageous, not only for allowing them to move more, but it actually lets them write faster, right? People, a lot of times, a good day writing, maybe 5,000 words, maybe 10,000 words if you had a really good day. That would be a great day writing, right? A lot of people say when they start switching to dictation and dictating their books, especially the first drafts of their books, they can write anywhere between 4,000 and 5,000 words an hour. And some of these authors are putting out multiple books a year because they're dictating them. And what now used to take them a year to type out on a computer, they can now dictate in a few weeks. Again, just like barefoot walking, there's a transition period to doing that. But it made me think, because I'm already out walking so much, because I use my walks to listen to books on Audible and to listen to podcasts, and I'm doing that frequently. I'm actually looking at, okay, what do I need to do to transition to dictating my books during my walks and even going for walks in quieter places so that I can begin to dictate. And they warn, the authors who do this warn there's a transition period to learn how to do this. But I'm already well behind schedule on the book I'm working on, Decolonizing Faith. And it's not going nearly as quickly as I had hoped. And so I'm actually in the process. About a year ago, I bought a voice recorder to this. And I bought it with the intention of trying to record more of my live presentations and to have a good audio recording of my live presentations. But I've never used it. It's a bit bigger than I thought it was going to be. It's a very high quality recorder, but I haven't used it much. And I realized I could completely use this while I'm out walking, or even when I'm just in my office here and I'm doing exercises or doing something and using this to dictate my book. And so that's what my goal is for this. I have a month at home. I'm home for the month of June. I don't travel again until July 2nd. And my goal was to get a lot of my writing done, to make some good progress in my book this next month. What I've adjusted my goal to is I want to learn how to dictate. And I already interact with my technology a lot. I love talking to my voice. I love using Hey Google and talking to my phone, and I love doing all these things and working like that. And so I really already do that. I talk to my technology on a regular basis already. And so that's not kind of a foreign concept to me. And I have used things like Naturally Speaking Dragon and so on years ago when I was trying to incorporate dictation into some of my work. This is almost 2 decades ago. I haven't used it extensively since then, but I would imagine that I know the voice recognition has gotten even better than it was 15, 20 years ago. But anyway, so that's the transition I'm making right now. And I'm kind of going through this paradigm shift, and I'm allowing myself to think about what are the changes I need to make. And one of the things I've been thinking about a lot, especially these past few months, I'm in my 50s now. I've already had hip replacement surgery. My surgeon warned me. They said, yeah, you can run, but be careful and don't run too much because your hip, right, it's now artificial and it can wear out. And so I'm like, yes, I'm actually really enjoying running right now. So I'm trying to figure out how can I run in a way that puts the least amount of impact on my body and is the healthiest for my body. And it turns out getting out of elevated shoes, getting out of really supportive shoes and doing barefoot running is one of the best things you can do for your body when you're trying to run and trying to move that way. And so what I'm thinking very intentionally about right now is I'm in my 50s. And I feel like I'm just now beginning to hit my stride in the work that I'm doing. The stuff I'm talking about, the changes I want to make. I ran for president in 2020. It didn't have the result I had hoped, but I feel like with the knowledge I've had and the study I've done over the past 20 years and the even the failures I've had, such as my 2020 campaign, the things I've learned from, right? I'm like, yeah, I'm by no means done trying to initiate some of the changes I'm working on, creating common memory, editing our Constitution, building a nation where we the people actually means all the people, removing land titles as the legal precedent for our removing the doctrine of discovery as the legal precedent for land titles. Right? All these things are things I want to work on, and I could easily see myself giving myself to these endeavors for the next 20 to 30 years. And so I want my body to be hopefully as sharp as my mind is going to be, right? I feel like my mind is finally getting to the point where I'm beginning to understand things, not just the details of these things, but what does it look like to kind of move these into a much broader worldview and thinking about things at a more national, even global level. And so I'm very much thinking of, I'm not even thinking about retirement yet. I'm not thinking about, I just want to go and sit at the beach. There's so much I want to do yet. And I want to have a mind that's clear, and I want to have a body that's healthy to be able to continue to invest in this type of work for decades yet. And so this is one of the reasons why I'm thinking through these things. And this is why I've actually given myself some space to shift my paradigm from exercise to movement, shifting away from being sedentary and sitting in a chair for 6, 8, 10 hours a day to moving much more throughout the day and being more active, and yet still finding a way to be productive and get my work done while I'm moving. I'll continue talking about this. Like I said, I'm actually treating, especially the running and the barefoot running that I'm doing, I'm treating that almost as a spiritual discipline. I actually talked about those things in my Patreon last month when I did my both my Join the Conversation and my Decolonizing Faith presentations for the month of May. Both were around kind of this paradigm shift and how I am using barefoot running as a spiritual discipline and so on and so forth. So if you want to join those, you can join my Patreon. Patreon is the best way to support my work. I'm doing a lot of work to keep my voice as independent as possible. And by subscribing to me on Patreon, not only did you get to join me and go deeper on some of these conversations with Q&As and extra presentations, but it's a great way to financially support the work that I'm doing, so I'm not dependent on advertisers or on large institutions or corporations to fund my work, which they will work to kind of limit my voice. So anyway, my relatives, I hope you've enjoyed this. If you want to look up this book, and I really like this author, Katy Bowman. She's actually a really funny author. She has outtakes, like a bloopers reel at the end of her book, her Audible book that she recorded, and it's actually really funny. If I ever record my own voice for my next book and do my Audible version of my book myself, or record it myself, I'm definitely going to do an outtake or a bloopers reel like she did. She was pretty funny on there. So I put a link to her book, as well as a link to a lecture that she gave on movement versus exercise. And I'm very grateful for the work she's doing and the way she's kind of flipping the paradigm. A lot of this I find lines up with what our Navajo people are already teaching and doing. I talk about that more on the Patreon, and here's the link to my Patreon. But anyway, my relatives, I hope you find this interesting and paradigm shifting and so on and so forth as I've been talking about it. But yeah, there's a lot of work we have to do, and I'm excited to be able to be with you, or to be able to share some of these things with you. But my relatives, I hope you have a great rest of the day. I hope your second cup of coffee is as good as mine is. Walk in beauty, my relatives. And may we all learn how to walk in beauty together. Ashahat and Hakonet.